Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be across this beautiful blue-green globe of ours. Welcome to Real News Live. This is a special Thursday edition. The new gold standard is what we're titling it today, with my special guest, the president, CEO, owner of Miles Franklin. Andy, are you all those things or some of those?
I guess I wear lots of hats, brother. Yeah, and it's an honor to be here with you, Mike. I appreciate the invite.
Well, it's an honor to have you on the show. Andy Schectman is my guest, guys. He is a well-known, very popular, very respected man in the precious metals business. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about what's been going on in the world for a while. I'm going to kind of run through a history lesson of how I think we got to where we are. And then I think Andy will talk about where you think we are and where you think we're going.
Yeah.
During this time of intense political turmoil, just to catch you up on the news, there are hot and heavy rumors that Joe Biden is about to resign. And they're not talking about 2 weeks. They're not talking about 2 months. Some people are saying no later than this afternoon. And part of that, I guess, is to try to put a little poop in the punch of Donald Trump's punch bowl. And of course, we had the assassination attempt on the president on Saturday. Things are getting volatile. They're getting interesting. And that's usually good for people that are invested in precious metals, isn't it, Andy?
Yeah, well, you know the old Chinese curse, Mike, may you live in interesting times. And yeah, I mean, it's not like you couldn't see this one coming. And the fact that they're just like the assassination attempt, just like the media trying to tell us, they just realized after 4 years that he was mentally challenged or showing signs of senility. We're supposed to believe that everyone down to the press secretary who's with him every day just realized it. Of course, you know, he was tired and he was jet lagged and had a cold during the debate. But other than that, he's been wonderful. The whole thing, the gaslighting, the right out in front of you, you know, like we didn't see this coming. I think it speaks to the way that they view the American public and the combined collective intellect. It's very distressing to me, Mike, for sure.
Yeah, gaslighting is what my ex-wife used to do to me all the time. Oh, no, that didn't happen. I never said that. I said this. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm crazy. So after a while, I was like, you know what? I moved to LA. I'm surrounded by beautiful 25-year-old girls. I think I'm just not going to deal with this anymore. And I feel the same way about Joe Biden. It's time for a divorce from this whole nonsense, including the complete nonsense that he actually won the election. So I don't know. We may get breaking news during the show is the reason why I'm bringing that up. But again, thank you for being here. Okay, I want to start with kind of where I'm on the currency side of things with Mark Z. You know Mark very well, obviously, and how I got interested in that is kind of an interesting story. And I learned about a lot of background that I didn't know, and I'm pretty sure all this history is real. So I'm just going to kind of go through this and then get your comments on it. It's going to take us a few minutes. And remember, everybody, all I'm offering you guys is the truth. Okay. I'm just going to try to offer you the truth today. That's all we're going to get to. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, as I understand the way things happen. Back on July the 2nd, actually, in 1776, there was a Declaration of Independence by the United States of America. We wanted to go our own way. We didn't want to be involved with the British Crown anymore. We issued the Declaration of Independence. It was, I believe, ratified on the 4th of July, which is why we have, oh, wow, it's 11/11. Okay. Why we have the Declaration and why we celebrate our Independence Day on the 4th of July. And of course, what then subsequently happened is we created a set of governing documents. They were called the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union between the states. They are the oversight set of laws. They are even beyond the Constitution, and there's a reason for that. which we're going to discuss here in a minute. They're more vague, they're not very specific, but they basically say this is the laws we're going to be governed by. So we got involved in a war with the British. The British did not take kindly to the colonies trying to escape from their control. We had the Revolutionary War, of course, the famous painting of George Washington crossing the Potomac. And the Revolutionary War was fought back and forth between the ragtag American army and the redcoats, the British redcoats, all the famous stories we've all been told. But the story that we really haven't been told is this: that America did not win the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War was basically a stalemate. But what happened is it became too expensive for the British to continue to perpetuate. So when Cornwallis surrendered to Washington at Yorktown, that event was part of a negotiated settlement, and it was a negotiated financial settlement because what happened was is that the United States had borrowed vast sums of money. Some people say as much as $500 million in 1776 coin from the Rothschilds Bank of France to finance the war. They were more than happy to finance our war against the British Crown because they were the sworn enemies at that time. And so we had a declaration of war. We made an arrangement with the French. They gave us money and arms and some soldiers, some mercenaries. They couldn't be directly involved. And then after that, we spent the next several years, about 13 years, creating something called the Constitution for the United States of America. I emphasize this is a different document than the Constitution of the United States of America, which is the current document. That is a corporate replacement that was inserted sometime around 1871. But the important thing to understand is this: a constitution is built, it's a financial document. A constitutor is someone who secures the debt of another party. So when we signed the Constitution, what we were actually doing was asking the Crown of England, the British Crown, to secure our debt as a nation, this, the debts of the United States, and pay off the Rothschilds Bank of France. And from that moment forward, we owed them money. And in 1789, when the Constitution was ratified, we lost our sovereignty as a republic because part of the deal was, and if you look at certain words, there's certain words that are capitalized that shouldn't be capitalized, and you put them into these gematria calculators, and they get very interesting stories get told. Don't have time to go through it today, but basically, this is a financial document saying, okay, guess what? We're no longer a sovereign republic. That only lasted 13 years, which is interesting, 1 year for each colony. But you get, as security for your investment, you get the national property of the United States government. That's what we promised them. So at that moment in 1789, the United States went into bankruptcy. Now, it's important to understand language with bankruptcies. When you go bankrupt, when you are bankrupted and you sign the documents, your debts are not forgiven. They're not. They are discharged. And a discharged debt simply means you don't have to pay it for 70 years. The assumption is that in 70 years, you'll be dead. And then those bills will go away. The creditors will be written off. Everything will be squared in the books. However, nations and corporations are not living, breathing entities, so they can't die. So after 70 years, the bankruptcy cycle comes up again. And if you don't have the money to pay the debt off, you have to go back through the process again. So part of the deal was that the Crown of England said, okay, this is fine, but we are going to have to establish a central bank of the United States. So what happened then was we went from being a republic to a democracy. In a democracy, everyone participates in every decision. The majority rules. There's no protection of individual rights. Does that sound familiar? No protection of property rights. Not practical for large countries, and it always ends in turbulence and violence. Does any of that sound familiar? Under a republic, which is what we're supposed to be, we're governed by elected representatives. We're governed by an established set of laws. Individual rights are protected, property rights are protected, and we avoid extremes like tyranny and mobocracy. So you can clearly see that we've strayed far away from the original intent of what this nation was supposed to be. So the Bank of the United States was founded. This is the original building in Washington, D.C., and it was given a 20-year charter. So that was founded in 1791. It was established so the British Crown could control all the money coming in and out of the United States national government. 20-year charter. That 20-year charter ended in 1811. 1791 to 1811 is 20 years. Andy, what happened then in 1811? Well, a war started between the British and the Americans. Again, the so called War of 1812. Well, what was that fought about? Well, guess what? We decided we weren't going to renew the charter for the Bank of the United States. And the British Crown said, oh, yes, you will. And they sent an army in and they sacked Washington, D.C. And the first place they went was not the White House, which they did burn. And they did not just take the president hostage. Well, they took the president hostage because he was the CEO of the corporation, but they went to the courthouse in Washington, D.C. Why? Because that's where all the titles and all the deeds for all the land owned by the U.S. government was stored, was in the Washington, D.C. courthouse. So now we fast forward 70 years from 1789, we come to 1859. We've had an established central bank. We had Andrew Jackson come along and say, no, we don't want that period of prosperity. But what happened is, again, the original Civil or Revolutionary War debt came due. By then, new states had joined the Union. And the northern states, the 13 original colonies, went to the Confederate southern states and said, okay, we got this debt we have to pay, $500 million. That's why Ron Paul says that that is the actual real debt of the United States, is a mere $500 million in real money. And we'll talk about real money in a minute. And the Southern states said, screw you guys. That's your debt, not ours. We're not paying it. We're going to form our own country. So they formed the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America. They broke away from the original Union. The Rothschilds Bank of France and the Crown of England said, oh, no, you don't. And so they financed Abraham Lincoln. They created slavery as a red herring, as the trope under which the Civil War was to be fought. And they financed the Union against the Confederacy. Now, it's important to understand a few things here. The Confederacy still exists as a legal entity. The Confederacy never surrendered. Lee surrendered his sword to Grant at Appomattox, but the Confederacy itself never surrendered. The Confederacy's currency, the Confederate dollar, is still technically a legal currency around the world. These are factoids people don't know. But after the Civil War was settled, after the Union and the bankers crushed the Confederate States of America, we came back in. The original 13th Amendment, which was supposed to be about nobility, and nobody with a title of nobility would be allowed to hold any office in the United States federal government. That was thrown out, and a new 13th Amendment was thrown in, which had to do with slavery. And what happened was that basically the United States was replaced with a corporation, which was a money-making corporation. And the states, after losing the war between the states lost their sovereignty. So what we had to give up in the bankruptcy cycle of 1859 was we had to give up our state sovereignty. So at this point, we've lost our national sovereignty and the sovereignty of the states. Well, then what happened is as we moved forward and this new corporate system was established, the corporate constitution was brought in 1909, 20 years before the next 70-year bankruptcy cycle of 1929. In 1909, there was a meeting at Jekyll Island in New Jersey, I believe, at a resort there. Is it New Jersey? I don't remember.
I think it's Georgia.
Georgia. There was a meeting there, and the United States Federal Reserve was created. As we all know, the Federal Reserve is neither federal nor is it a reserve. It's a privately owned bank. And they said, hey, how are we going to deal with this upcoming bankruptcy in 20 years? So they came out with a plan. The first part of the plan was to create the income tax. That was where they could now tax people's income, their means of supply, their means of feeding themselves and buying property and all sorts of things. And it led to the eventual events of 1929, which is the stock market crash. The stock market did not crash on its own, it was deliberately crashed as part of the process. So then they have to come up with a new plan to be signed off to their creditors in bankruptcy in 1929. The plan was, okay, now we're going to take away the sovereignty of the individual. And in order to do that, they had to take away, guess what, Andy? The gold and silver. They had to take away the real money. We ended up in the Great Depression. They took away our money. When they took away our real money, our real coinage, gold and silver, which the Black's Law Dictionary of 1933 defines real money as 0.9999 perfect silver or gold. That's money. They took that away, and instead they gave us the means of issuing credit. That's why we have now the dollar bills, which are promissory notes. Okay, that basically you're paying a debt with a debt. But we had the Great Depression. This led to, how they had to come up with this plan. How are we going to get out of this? Well, they created the Great Depression. They then created the setup for World War II. They took the gold, they took the gold certificates, they took all this stuff away from us. So the individual had now lost his sovereignty, and he lost the ability to truly own anything. Because if you pay for a home, let's say, with gold or silver, you're supposed to have what's called a allodial title, meaning no one can take that property from you. They can't tax it, they can't take it, they can't do anything. But they took that right away as a means of generating income. And all of this was purposed to the idea of getting enough money to keep making their payments on their bankruptcy to the creditors. The creditors took this stuff from the American people. They took the gold and silver. They took all of our rights away in return for discharging the bankruptcy for another 70 years. This led to World War II. The rise of Nazi Germany was financed by the Rothschilds Bank of France, among others. The Germans ran across Poland. They ran across France. They conquered much of Europe. And this was all staged event. This was how they got us out of the Great Depression. When the United States was reluctant to enter the war, guess what? A sneak attack, which probably wasn't really much of a sneak attack, happened at Pearl Harbor, and the United States entered the war. So the entire world got into this terrible conflagration in which 45, 50, 70, 100 million people lost their lives, all to serve the bankers. So how did they finance all this? Well, one of the ways they did it is through, and of course we ended up with the Battle of Iwo Jima. We conquered Nazi Germany eventually. We dropped the atomic bomb on Imperial Japan. And what did they do after that? Well, they came up with a kind of a nefarious plan. The plan was, this is Hiroshima and Berlin after the war. It's Berlin, actually. And they came up with kind of a nefarious plan. And that plan was, guess what we're going to do? How we're going to pay for this whole thing? We're going to print the new Japanese currency. We're going to print the new yen, and we're going to print the new Deutschmark. The United States printed all those. They printed billions for Germany and billions for Japan, and they printed the exact same amount and put it into our own treasury. So how they paid for everything under the Marshall Plan was they went back and said, okay, guess what? Now the German Deutschmark isn't worth fractions of a penny anymore. After 10 years, it's worth $3.21 or whatever it was. Same thing with the yen. So what happened is all the creditors got paid all that money, all that paper value on the paper currency. And how they financed this was through something called the birth certificate. The birth certificate became a thing in the 1930s as part of the New Deal. That's why they insisted on having everybody sign paperwork and so forth when you're born, because you were given a birth in the sea of commerce, is how it was looked at, okay? You were given a birth, B-E-R-T-H, in the sea of commerce, and you were given the financial value. So from the birth certificates, they then created securities which were then used to be the basis of the new financial system. And it says things like, our system is based on the full faith and credit of the United States, yada, 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 yada. And we went on and on like this and didn't even know that our birth certificates were financial instruments. So just to prepare, we were now coming up to the next 70-year cycle, which is 1999. And about 10 years before 1999, guess what somebody did? They ran a test run. Iraq invaded Kuwait. We repulsed the invasion in Operation Desert Storm. Oh, everybody was a hero. We drove them out of Kuwait. Guess what the United States did then? We printed the new Kuwaiti currency for them, the Kuwaiti dinar. We printed all of it. And guess what? For every trillion dinars we printed out for them, we printed a trillion for ourselves. So in 1998, when it revalued back to its pre-war value of about $3.20, guess what? Everybody who was holding the Kuwaiti dinar became a very rich man. He suddenly had millions of US dollars, 3 million, $3 for every Kuwaiti dinar they held. But only a few people were allowed to do that. It was a test run for how they were going to try to pay off the 1999 bankruptcy. So, okay, they thought this was great. That, if you remember, all of a sudden the U.S. suddenly had a surplus. Remember that when Bush was elected in 2000? Where'd that surplus come from? It came from the revaluation of the Kuwaiti dinar, and it was all on paper. So this gave the bad guys some pretty interesting ideas. So if you look at the 70-year bankruptcy cycle, we had the Constitution enacted in 1789. We had the Bank of the United States, which was led to the War of 1812. 70 years later, in 1859, the Civil War. 50 years after that, Jekyll Island, where they created the new financial system. 1929, the stock market crash. And in 1999, they had to come up with another plan to pay off the bankruptcy cycle. And I believe that plan was 9/11. So the idea behind 9/11 was we're going to get ourselves again into a war where all this money is created through all this economic activity. And then we will tax the heck out of that and send it back to the European creditors and foreign creditors who are the real owners of the United States. Now, when we get into this birth certificate thing, it's important to understand there's 10 different Federal Reserve districts. Each one of them has a number and they have a corresponding letter. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston has got an A designation. Philadelphia is C, Cleveland is D, Atlanta is F, yada, yada, yada. That's the way it goes. So what they've done is on our Social Security cards, excuse me, they printed hang on just a second. They printed your public Social Security number on the front, and on the back, they printed your real account number at the Federal Reserve. Here is the sequential control number. It's got an F. It has 9 digits. This is the account number. The F stands for, what did the F stand for? Was it Atlanta? Yeah, F. So that is an account at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta that exists in somebody's name. If you look at your Social Security card, there's a red number on the back. They've now gone to a couple letters because they're printing so much money, but you look at the first letter and then the numbers. That is the bank at which your account is held, and you have an account in all 10 districts. Now, when I found out about this in 2009, you used to be able to go to Fidelity Investments and look at their mutual funds. And I was told to go there and type in my birth year. So I went there and I typed in 1970 and I'm kidding. And it came up with a value of, there is a mutual fund called 1970 and it's valued at $11.1 billion. What that means is each person born in the year 1970 is now, their birth certificate is a financial security with a value of $11.1 billion. And because we live in a fractional reserve banking system, that's 10 times over all 10 districts. So in other words, you, Andy Schectman, everybody out there, you're worth, let's say it's 10 billion, let's round it down because it varies for every birth year. You have a value of $10 billion times 10, so $100 billion. Every time you write a check, every time you get a loan, every time you use a credit card, the money is actually taken out of your Federal Reserve Bank account and given to the transacting bank. That's why when you buy a home with a mortgage, the mortgage doesn't say the bank owns your property. It calls you the homeowner because they took your money and gave it to you and tricked you into thinking that it was their money and you owed them. That's not what happened. So, anyway, to get to the history part of it, get through this so Andy can talk. Um, we had the 9/11 events that was designed after the test run to get us into a war in Iraq. That's exactly what we did. Bush pushed us into the Iraq war. There was a lot of mission accomplished. Remember that? And what was that, 2003 or something? Mission accomplished. It went on. We used a lot of fake information about weapons of mass destruction. Now, there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq at one time. When Colin Powell showed you satellite photos of buildings and laboratories and things and trucks showing up the day before the inspectors got there and coming back the day after, they were moving chemical weapons around, but those chemical weapons were taken and then they were buried in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. And it's interesting that in 2006, when the Israelis had had enough of this crap, they invaded Lebanon, they went up to the Bekaa Valley, and they stopped. They waited there a month, and then they turned around and came back. Now, the reason that they did that is they were after the buried chemical weapons. So there was some truth to the fact that Iraq had chemical weapons, but just like slavery, that was the excuse. So the plan was that they were going to basically rescue us from this fiat currency crisis, this worthless paper currency crisis, by revaluing the Iraqi dinar exactly the way they had done it in Kuwait, only they were going to print more and more and more so that they could offset the public national debt of the United States by using the Iraqi dinar exactly the way they had done it with Germany and Japan after World War II and Kuwait after the invasion of Kuwait in 1991. This was the plan. That, however, supposedly has been hijacked by the good guys. And the plan now, Andy, as I understand it, is and we seem to be seeing possibly this, playing out. The plan now, as I understand it, is that there will be paper currencies, there will be cryptocurrencies, but they will all be backed by assets, by gold and silver if you got it, by oil if you don't, by the labor of your people. That's the plan, as I understand the so-called global currency reset. So that's kind of where I feel like we got here. There's other things that are involved, the Reagan-Mitterrand protocols from the 1980s, all this kind of stuff. But I'm wondering what you think about all that, and how much of that did you know, and how much of that didn't you
I think you're in the wrong profession. You should have been a history teacher.
know?
I mean,
Thanks.
I know actually, embarrassingly enough, very little. And it's I talk about this with my father a lot, who was a history major. It's one of my great regrets in life that I don't know enough about history. I focus more upon the here and now. And you know the old saying, you can't really know where you're going unless you know where you've been. You've inspired me to do some digging. Of course, I know, about the Federal Reserve and the fact that it is, as you say, neither a federal entity or a reserve bank. But um, it's interesting. I mean, and a lot of it certainly makes sense. Now, I've heard bits and pieces of it along the way, but certainly you're a heck of a historian and able to put all of this together with a lot of research. I applaud you for it. I wish I could comment more upon it, but the reality of is that what you just said to me was incredibly interesting and as much of a history lesson as I've had in a very long time.
Yeah. Thanks. It's interesting because they quote took us off the gold standard in 1971 is what everybody says, and actually they took us off of it, as we talked about, in 1933 or 32 or 33. And the excuse, of course, was the Great Depression. But what Nixon really did, and I didn't he it didn't he all it was is that the value of our dollar was restricted to the amount of gold we had in Fort Knox. And what Nixon did is he took us off of that because, as I understand it, they had to keep giving the gold to the foreign bankers in order to keep trying to pay this debt that we were never going to get out of. So they had to go to a pure credit based fiat currency system. And there's all kinds of other little details, like,
Well, and we took over for the pound sterling at the end of World War II at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire. That was the meeting that anointed the dollar the world reserve currency, replacing the pound sterling. And we told the world at that point that you take our dollars and you can always exchange it for gold at a rate of $35 an ounce. And not only that, you had all of the European countries that had been ravaged by two world wars. So we said, how about this? Give us your gold. We will safeguard it for you. We'll hold it because it's a non interest bearing asset. So we'll pay you 35 bucks an ounce for every ounce of gold you give us. You can always buy it back at that rate. And
Mhm.
then take those $35 and plug it back into our treasury system, help build our country. We'll pay you interest for it. You can now not have to worry about storing this gold and it being a non-interest bearing entity or asset. Rather, we will pay you interest on it. We'll safeguard it. You can always return it or your dollars at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. And you're right, towards the end of the Vietnam War in 71, funding our guns and butter initiative, funding the Vietnam War, de Gaulle from France largely was the one who realized we were printing more dollars than we had gold at Fort Knox. So he sent warships to New York Harbor filled with dollars and said, we'll have the gold, please. And we gave it to him, bled down over half the gold held at the Treasury. And that was why Nixon went back, supposedly temporarily, never opened it back up, but
Now, see,
closed
I
the
did not know
gold
that.
window.
Speaking of
Yes.
history lessons and learning from you, I did not know that that was the motivation for doing it. So then, interestingly, didn't we then had to pivot, right, to basically linking the dollar up with oil? Then is that what drove that?
Yeah. 3 years later, Henry Kissinger went to Saudi Arabia and said, listen, we'll protect you in the Saudi kingdom. We'll provide weapons and assistance. No one will ever mess with you. But for that, you and by extension, OPEC, not only will you value oil globally in dollars to where, Mike, up until now, almost 90% of all oil transactions across the globe have been done in dollars, but you'll also take any excess reserves that you have and plug them back into US treasuries. Recycling, it was called. So it gave a strong demand for the U.S. Treasury and made every single country on the planet create a synthetic demand for the dollar by needing to stockpile them in order to buy oil. And so, yeah, that's the rise of the petrodollar. In essence, it's the protection of the Saudi kingdom and by extension, the willingness of OPEC to value globally all oil sales in US dollars. And it has been that way since 1974.
However, it seems like the world is now slipping away from that. The BRICS countries coming along are a direct threat to that. And the idea that our money is gold backed, or anything along those lines is kind of out the window now. I mean, isn't it? We've reached a point now where we literally don't have any. I mean, I hear that I've been told there's no gold in Fort Knox at all. It's all been repatriated to other countries. What do you think about
Well,
that?
to both points, the latter first. Fort Knox hasn't been audited since 1953. Ron Paul has tried to have it audited, I think, twice, and both times he was turned down. And to your point about backed by nothing, Putin just gave a speech a few weeks ago in St. Petersburg where he said the Bretton Woods system is dead. The dollar is backed by nothing but the supposed trust and confidence of the United States.
Right.
And so when you talk about full faith and credit, we're a country that has a $35 trillion debt nearly, but nearly 200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Medicare Part B is 99 trillion underfunded. Part D, the prescriptions are 22 trillion. Social Security 77 trillion. The government military pensions and all of the entitlements put us in debt totally over $200 trillion. So when we talk about credit, we don't have any. We're broke and we're insolvent. And when you talk about the faith, and I think this is more to his point, we go around the world in a very hypocritical manner. You mentioned Iraq. You know, we invaded them 20 years ago under the guise of weapons of mass destruction. And whether they were there and buried in Lebanon or not, the world believes there were none. So we went there 20 years ago. We're still there. We're still sanctioning them. We're sanctioning 14 of their banks where we supposedly installed a new regime. We destroyed their country. We're here 20 years later and they made 90 billion in oil revenue last year. At the end of the year, they asked us, "Can we have a billion of that, please? We need it."
Yeah.
We said no. And so, what have they done? They've made trading in dollars illegal. If you own a business and do so, you will be thrown in jail. They have gotten rid of all green bills in the whole country. No dollars, tens, 20s, 50s, hundreds. They're gone as of January 1st of this year.
Right.
They have officially applied to BRICS, and they are, I think, certainly of the mindset that they want to now, and publicly just said, kick all Western coalition forces out of the country. We are viewed as a hypocritical country who can, the Treasury Secretary can tell CNN, we're okay with Putin and Xi being friends. They are BRICS allies after all. But if Xi gives one penny to the Russian war effort, we will sanction their banks, their businesses in Beijing itself. Never mind the fact that we've given F-16 Stinger missiles, 260 billion with no governmental oversight, and the intelligence on where to fire those missiles and drop the bombs out of the F-16s. And it doesn't matter what we do because we're the world reserve currency, and our what doesn't stink. So you just
Right.
mind your own business. That hypocrisy is creating a very big problem. The weaponization of the dollar, and to Putin's point, what trust, what faith, what credit? We
Hmm.
are a fiat system that has squandered the good graces of our foreign creditors through weaponization of the dollar, through creating $1 trillion of debt every 100 days, which is $100,000 per second. One, two, three,
Wow.
four,
I
five.
can use
That's
some of that.
100 grand every second of debt. It took 200 years to do it the first time. We did it in 100 days or less. A trillion seconds ago, Mike, was 31,688 years ago. So when you talk about how big this problem is and the need for a global reset, yeah, there is most certainly a need for a reset because you will never pay that debt back ever, especially as rates on the long end of the treasury go higher, as all of these countries say to themselves, well, what the hell do we want US treasuries for when they can be weaponized, when rates can go 500 basis points up in a year and
Mm.
destroy the value of the treasuries in circulation? They can take them from you and actually steal them, which we have just done. We have stole 5 billion in treasuries that we are holding in the United States from Russia. That's default. It's not sanctioning, it's theft. And worse yet, convert it, most of it, into weapons to provide to the country that they are fighting a war against. That is a line you never come back from. But why would we hold their treasuries that when, if we don't align ideologically, they'll take it from us? And why would we want to sell anything to them and receive a currency that is being inflated away at a level it's almost hard to comprehend? So, yes, the
It is.
reset, to your point, one way or the other, is coming.
It's coming one way or the other. We don't know what form it's going to take. I hope it goes a certain way. Either if it goes my way, we both profit. If it goes your way, I don't get I don't get much out of it. But either way, I think it's good for the world. And for another example of $1 trillion, folks, it if you spent a million, imagine most of us can imagine $1 million, right? These days, you've seen $1 million house. $1 million doesn't buy you that much in Vegas
Heck,
anymore.
you live in Vegas, the World Series of Poker, they have 11 million in $100 bills sitting on the
Yeah,
table for the final table.
it might not even get $1 million here. Might not even get you a pool in Vegas, depending on where it is. You can have a house, smaller house, and a pool, or you can have a big house. Take your pick, but no pool. But you can imagine a Ferrari costs 450,000 or something like that. You can imagine spending $1 million. Now imagine spending $1 million every day. Basically, I've made pretty good money in the past, and you run out of things to buy after a while. Unless you have enough money to buy that Ferrari, you run out of stuff to buy. There's just not enough stuff. There's only so many TVs, only so many gadgets, only so many reheats as you can buy. $1 million a day. Now spend $1 million a day every day for 2,700 years. That's $1 trillion. We are $200 trillion in debt right now. All of it on paper, none of it real, but we're in a situation, like you said, where something has to change. Now, I look at the stock market. I'm like, how is this continuing to flourish? They keep pumping more dollars into it, more money into it to make it look like it's going, but it's going up, but there's no real growth happening.
Well,
It's the
in
same.
fact, you could argue it's going the other way because Yes, in dollar terms, it's going much higher, and that's what happens in an inflationary cycle. But if you measure it over the last 15 years in ounces of gold, it's actually losing ground in terms of how many ounces of gold it takes to buy the Dow. And so that, I think you'll see 1 to 1 again, like we saw in 1980 with 850 gold and 850 on the Dow. But when you use gold as your barometer, what we are heading into, I believe, will be massive inflation, perhaps hyper stagflation, which is massive increase in prices characterized by higher taxes, higher
Right.
prices, but little or no economic growth. It's
Right.
it's the Great Depression meets the printing press. But in that environment, you will see a massive boom in the value of the stock market, perhaps, along with a commodity super cycle where the Dow continues to rise but loses ground in terms of how
Well,
many ounces of gold it takes to
wait a
buy
minute.
the Dow in terms of real
You just
assets.
scared me. You just scared me there. So gold is about 2,000 an ounce, 2,300 an ounce. What is it?
20 right now it is 24.50.
2,450 an ounce. So if we go to 1, then the stock market's going to go from 39,000 to 22,400.
Or one thing that a lot of people don't think about, and I think it's worth mentioning, um, everyone thinks there's two ways out. I've talked about a third way out. There's a fourth way. My mentor, Richard Russell, used to say 15 years ago when we had an $18 trillion debt, just goes to show in 2009, I think the
I thought
debt
that was
was
a lot.
in 2009, the debt was 17 trillion and it's doubled in since then. It goes to show how
Yeah.
fast it compounds. But he used to say the Fed is screwed and they have two choices to inflate or die, inflate or default. I've talked about incentivizing the world to dump dollars. Our lead economic advisor is Jared Bernstein, a man who advocates for the loss of the petrodollar, the loss of the reserve standard. It's a privilege we can no longer afford. So you think about weaponizing the dollar, signing an executive order to go green, and letting this country fall to shit. Well, that would incentivize all of these countries to dump dollars and find another avenue, which would create a villain, Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC. That's option three, find a villain. And that's on the table. But option four is something that we don't hear enough of. You mentioned something at the beginning, and this is what you mentioned right here. This is Roosevelt. This is the executive order to confiscate gold. This is a $20 gold coin. He confiscated gold and paid everyone 20.56 an ounce. 56 cents in 1933 was worth a whole hell of a lot more than 56 cents is today. It was worth a good amount of money.
Absolutely.
And so people were thrilled, but then he devalued the dollar by 40% immediately, thereby revaluing the price of gold by 40%. Now, here's the ironic thing. We talk about Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods in 1944, after the war, gold on every central bank balance sheet of the world, according to the Bretton Woods numbers, was $35 an ounce. And it is still held on all of these central bank balance sheets at $35 an ounce. In the account name on every central bank balance sheet is called the gold revaluation account. You can't make it up. They call it the gold revaluation account. And if you realize that since 2017, the central banks of the world have been buying gold at a level no one has ever seen before, using the suppression of the Western markets, where on the London Bullion Metals Association, they trade 2.9 billion ounces of silver per day. They quote 290 million, but they say those numbers are 10 times underreported because they only report the final settlement, not all the trades to get there. So they admit 10 times, that's 2.9 billion. That would be 3.5 times annual global mine supply. And using the same logic, they trade 200 million ounces of gold per day. The price of gold, or the contracts on the COMEX in New York, is rehypothecated hundreds of percent more over and over and over again. In other words, silver is 1,700% rehypothecated. That means everyone who thinks they own a silver contract, if they all stand for delivery, one gets it, 16 get cash, and the exchange blows up. Gold's a little less than that. But the point is, the distortions in the price of gold and silver, no one knows what the real values are. And this is what the countries around the world understand this, and they have been using the Western suppression to drain all of the vaults, to take massive deliveries since 2017, huge deliveries nonstop, and draining the exchanges. Now, they're all loading up on gold, right? What if they use the gold revaluation account for real? In fact, the head of the Dutch National Bank has been talking about this incessantly, where he says our balance sheet has turned negative, but we don't care. We have 20 billion euro in the gold revaluation account at 35 bucks an ounce. What if all of these countries who have been accumulating gold, right? And most of it at the behest of the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements is the central banker's central bank. What did they do in 2019? Oh, they revalued gold as the world's only other tier one reserve asset. Before that, after World War II, the only tier ones were U.S. dollars and treasuries. Now, gold is the only other tier one. Since 2017, all of these central banks have been buying gold hand over fist. And I just want to mention that just in the past, well, since 2017, and really a lot of them lately, just in a quick search, Germany, Austria, Slovakia, Argentina, the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, Belgium, Egypt, Senegal, Romania, Nigeria, Poland, Ghana, India, Turkey, France, Serbia, Czechoslovakia, South Africa, Cameroon, Algeria, Venezuela, and a whole shitload of other countries have not only been buying gold, but repatriating it from the Bank of England and the New York Fed. The reason they have always been held there is the Bank of England gives direct access to the London Bullion Metals Association, and the COMEX and the New York Fed, well, they're right next door to each other. So you had your metals held in stable jurisdictions with the Western rule of law, LOL, and the ability to access the big exchanges. Well, now we see all of these countries massively accumulating gold, repatriating gold, bringing it home with no counterparty liability after the most powerful bank on the planet reclassified it tier one. All of the gold on their balance sheets is held in the revaluation account. So let's just play around for a second. What if they value gold at 10,000 an ounce? And how crazy is it to think that? Look, right now, China is valuing silver over $4 higher than it is in the West, and it's siphoning through arbitrage all of the gold and all of the silver that is not nailed down in the Western vaults. The sophisticated traders who can buy in the West and deliver in the East are doing that. What if they made it $40 or $50? Gold is only about, I don't know, 40, 50 bucks higher in Shanghai than it is in the rest of the world. That still incites arbitrage. But what if all the central banks say gold is now 10,000 an ounce? Just like that, your balance sheet goes from putrid to pristine. You now have more asset value than you do liabilities. And the funny thing about it is when you think of the term balance sheet, the assets, the gold that the countries hold is on their asset side of the balance sheet, but the revaluation account mirrors that on the liability side. You are not allowed as a central bank under current laws to offset a liability with your gold asset. So that's why they put the same exact amount in the revaluation account on the liability side. What if they change that rule and they say all Western countries or all BRICS countries, gold is now 10,000 an ounce? And we can talk about the new currency unit that was just announced in Novograd, Russia, called the unit, which will be traded over Project Enbridge, which is the cross-border payment system developed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, United Arab Emirates, and backed by guess who? The Bank of International Settlements. So when we talk about all of these countries buying gold, repatriating their gold, and keeping it in the revaluation account, what if they make it 10,000 an ounce? You don't have to reset. All Trump would need to do is say the 8,300 metric tons, which no one has seen since 1953, is now valued at $10,000 an ounce. And bang, our balance sheet goes from horseshit to solvent to a instead of having a deficit, we have a surplus.
Yeah,
now, I'm not saying they're going to do that, but it certainly begs the question, why did the BIS reclassify gold tier one? And why are the central banks buying it over the last 2.5, 3 years at a level the world has never, ever seen before? In fact, first quarter this year, 2024, not only did India buy 1.5 times the amount they did in all of 2023 and bring it all home and bring 100 metric tons home that they've held at the Bank of England since 1991, not only did they do that, but we're seeing all of these countries do the same thing. And the first quarter of 2024 was the most gold central banks have ever bought in the first quarter, only supplanting what we saw in first quarter 2023. One way or the other, whether it be outright dumping of dollars, which because every country's had to stockpile them to buy oil, and now they don't, when that's something we can get into why they won't. And all of those dollars and treasuries hit our shore, creating hyperinflation, the byproduct of which would be interest rates going to the moon, not controlled by Powell and the Fed, but by the market, because you can't have 30% inflation and 5% interest rates. Your currency dies. So if interest rates went to 30% as the dollar gets dumped, not only does the dollar die, stocks die, bonds die, real estate dies, the banks implode because they're massively over leveraged and undercapitalized, and so do the insurance companies who are loaded with treasuries. The whole system resets. So either they take the painful way of doing it and blame it on those sons of bitches who dumped the dollar, Xi Jinping, Putin, and OPEC, and the rest of the world who's had to stockpile it for 50 years, creating that synthetic demand. Or maybe they just say, all right, gold's 15, 20,000 an ounce and it's pegged to a new system. And just like that, everything is great. Now,
Yeah.
could that happen? Abso-freaking-lutely. Because who does Trump want to be the head of the Fed?
Treasury Secretary. Yeah, it's Jamie Dimon. Can I?
No. The head of the Fed, he
Oh,
wants to be Judy Shelton, who's a gold,
Judy
who is
Shelton,
an advocate of the gold standard.
Gold Hawk. Yeah, she's a
Right,
Gold Hawk.
and who supposedly has you mentioned JP. Well, I wouldn't really love it, but no one understands gold and silver better than they are. They do. According to Ted Butler, God rest his soul, accumulated over 1 billion ounces of silver and 35 million ounces of gold over the last several years by suppressing the price. And for those who think that's conspiratorial nonsense, JP Morgan paid a $920 million fine by the Justice Department, the largest fine they've ever laid out, 2 years ago for manipulating the metals market. Their head trader, Michael Nowak, who I know is still in prison, and yet their trading desk that year made $1 billion, their gold desk, but they paid a $920 million fine. They walked away 80 million up, and they're still allowed to be the administrator of the world's largest silver trust, SLV. In other words, they're controlling the largest stockpile of silver in the world, and their head traders in prison for manipulating the metals market. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a fine line between conspiracy and reality, Mike, and one way or the
We're,
other,
we're,
we'll get
we're right
arrested.
on it, Andy.
Yeah.
A couple of points. The Bank of International Settlements is also where they hold your birth certificate bonds, as that's where they hold them. You're bought and sold on the commodities market as chattel, usually under a fake mutual fund based on your birth year. In other words, everybody born in 1960 is sold as one. People buy and sell, and your
Well, you
birth.
and I are on the same mutual fund. I was born in 70 as well.
That's why, yeah, that's why you will never see Barack Obama's real original birth certificate, nor will you ever see yours, because it's been stamped by banks, accepted for value over and over and over again. Another thing is Iraq. You talked about Iraq way back there. They are at the WTO today, the World Trade Organization, about to ascend into the WTO, have a marketable currency, a market value currency. That means they are not going to be sold. Their currency is not going to be 8 thousandths of a cent anymore. There's going to have to be some new value that's going to come out. It's going to be backed by oil. And I also know there are people that I know that have told me that there has been people, they've been acquiring gold and silver. Governments and treasuries have been acquiring gold and silver for a long time, for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I've been sent pictures of some of these items. There are old historic gold sources that were stashed in the Philippines. These are the so-called golden guns. Remember the Bond movie, The Man with the Golden Gun? There's a lot of symbolic stuff in that. There's all kinds of these different treasures from decades ago, hundreds of years ago in some cases, being held in the Philippines in caves and things like that, that is now being brought on ledger in order to back this transition. And Andy, I like your transition, but I'd still have to work. So I'd really prefer my reset rather than yours. But I imagine there would be enough money to fund everything, to fund Social Security, to fund Medicare, to fund everything that we might need to make this
And
planet.
it's ironic that you say that too, Mike, because at the same time, all of these governments are massively accumulating gold. What are they also massively accumulating? Debt. So, squeeze as much out of the system as you can, buy a whole bunch of gold, bring it home within your own borders, and we revalue the price of gold.
Right.
Which is really, really very, very compelling if you think about it. And, and it ties into the new BRIC settlement currency called the unit,
Right.
whereby in the white paper it says the gold that will be used to mint the unit tokens, whether or not they do it, will be held within the borders of the country that possesses it, independently audited with stringent penalties for noncompliance to the unit infrastructure, but it won't be sent to a central location like the BIS or like
Yeah.
Moscow or Dubai or Shanghai
The
or
World
any of these
Bank or whatever,
places.
right? Now,
Yes.
this is interesting because this is what Gaddafi was trying to do in Africa. He was trying to mint an African
It was
gold-backed
the
currency.
gold dinar. Yes, it
That's
was the
why they
gold
killed him.
dinar.
It was golden dinar. That's why they killed him. Going to a gold-backed system, that was back in 2008 or so. And what I guess is that maybe it seems like maybe governments got the idea that this maybe wasn't such a bad idea to go forward. Maybe they decided, well, maybe we should just start doing what he was trying to do and go to this system of gold-backed or asset-backed currencies. What do you think about the concept of not necessarily basing everything just on gold or silver? What do you think about the concept of the asset backed currency? That in other words, Vietnam is their currency is valued based on the labor and productivity of their people. Or did we try that with the US dollar and then ended up blowing up in our
Well,
faces?
you know, it's interesting because Sergei Glaziev is the Russian finance minister and the minister of the Eurasian Economic Union, finance minister. He's been talking that way for 3 years, a basket of commodities. But when announced, there was a meeting that coincided with the G7 meeting. And the G7 meeting in Italy, where the royal crown prince was invited, he turned it down, but sent his finance ministers to the meeting in Novigrad at the same time just a few weeks ago. And out of it, Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil, she came out and said, we had a meeting, myself, Glaziev, and Putin, and we decided in principle to issue a new settlement currency called the unit. And Glaziev is the one who said it would be a basket of currencies of the BRICS nations and a basket of commodities. They came out and said it will be a basket of currencies of the BRICS nations and a basket of gold, period. So that's what they're saying. And I think the reason is the variability of other commodities and, things, if a country produces wheat, well, wheat can go bad or, and when you talk about the, shipping, if it's copper, well, the cost of shipping it and all of these things I think are too hard. You have too many variabilities. And while that certainly to me does make sense because not everyone has a ton of gold, if you look, for example, even it's interesting,
You
if you
look
look
at
at
oil. Oil is constantly doing this, right?
yes, and if you look at the amount of gold that all the European countries have as a percentage of GDP, the amount of gold that they've bought, it's almost exactly the same over the last few years. They've all leveled out to almost exactly the same thing. There is a drive by all of these countries to produce or to accumulate gold.
So you think that's driving towards a one-to-one currency valuation worldwide? Is that what you're saying? You think
Well,
that
I
that's
don't, I
the idea?
just think that they all need to have enough of it. Maybe they know what the number they're going to revalue it at is. I don't know. But there is no question but that the central banks of the world are accumulating gold at a fever pitch. And they've been able to do it by allowing the Western markets to suppress the shit out of the price of gold to maintain the illusion of dollar and bond supremacy. And because
Yeah.
really, Gibson's paradox largely speaks, which is an economic term, to the inverse relationship between real interest rates and gold. So if you suppress interest rates, you need to suppress gold. And for all of these years with low interest rates, they've been stepping on the price of gold in the futures markets to maintain this illusion, allowing all of these countries to load up on gold at while no one was paying attention, because one of the byproducts of low interest rates would be assets that get distorted through misallocations of resource and capital. No one knows what anything is worth. In other words, I bought a house in Florida 3 years ago. When I moved here, 30-year mortgage rate was 3%. So, what is a house worth at 3% versus 7 versus 10 versus
Right.
20%? And so
Right.
no one really knows what asset prices are worth due to all of these distortions and all of the money that's been created. But what I will tell you is that there is no question that all the central banks are buying gold. And you look at the one asset that every central bank on the planet owns, and it is gold.
But are they really buying it, or are they just saying we have this amount of gold? I mean, I've got the pictures. I know there's all kinds of gold out there that nobody's known about that's been off ledger for a century or more. But do we know for a fact that these banks actually have the
Glad you
gold that
brought
they
that
say?
up. If I were China, I would want to tell the world I only have 2,600 metric tons like they tell us, yet That's crap. In fact, even the IMF says so. They said they're way underreporting. They're the largest producers in the world and have been using our trade imbalance to produce between 4 and 500 metric tons a year for the last 25 years. They buy more than anyone in the world, and they basically don't sell an ounce. Alistair McLeod, one of the smartest guys I've ever met, thinks they have 40,000 metric tons, which would be 5 times more than we have. If you know you're going to revalue gold and you want to get a competitive advantage on everyone, and you keep having these trade surpluses because the brain dead West pays you in dollars to buy party trinkets and or party favors and trinkets from China, they take that money, even if it's uneconomical, and either buy gold or mine it uneconomically, so that they can stockpile as much as they possibly can while keeping the price low. The Western price has been suppressed forever, and the only reason they don't bitch about it is because they're accumulating it. Once they have enough or a reset happens, COMEX and the LBMA will no longer set the price for gold. They don't own enough of it. In fact, even the head of the Chinese Shanghai Gold Exchange said when the Chinese are allowed to speak at the table, the real price of gold will be known. They just developed the BRICS Grain Exchange. The head of the BRICS Grain Exchange said we produce and accumulate and we produce and use more grain than anyone in the world, yet we don't have the ability to set the price. It's done so on the COMEX. They know what we're doing with these markets, so they're using it to our to their advantage and our disadvantage. So if you knew this was going to happen, that gold's being reclassified and it will peg a new system, you don't want to tell people that you're on a massive buying spree and how much you really own. And the same thing is true here. We haven't had our gold, the people's gold, audited since 1953. And every time Ron Paul says, let's audit it, no, we say, he gets turned down until it comes time to lift up your skirt. And then you'll see what you're made of. Are you a boy or a girl? And we'll see it right now. And that is the truth, because then you can't lie. Okay, fine. We actually have 45,000 metric tons, us Chinese do. And now that gold is, and here it is, come audited, it's right here. And now we're going to peg gold to a new system. Guess who's the richest country in the world? And so, yeah, it would not. And to your point, Gaddafi and the gold, where did his gold go? And how about Hussein's? Where did his gold go? And
Yeah.
how about the 12 billion in gold that the Ukrainians said they sold to fund the war? Where'd that go? So all of this gold that just seems to be disappearing into the ether, do we have it? I don't know. Where did it all go? Don't know. Just like they say, so many of the servicemen in Iraq were told to take as many Iraqi dinars as they can get their hands on and bring it back because this was going to happen. Well, where'd the gold go?
Yeah.
I'm just simply saying there's a lot that we don't know, but the Occam's razor in all of this, and I can see why you're a contributor to the Y Files. You're a hell of a researcher, and you've opened my eyes to some cool things. But which is one of my favorite shows, by the way.
Great show.
But you look at Occam's razor and you say, why would they're Hecklefish? Why would the BIS reclassify gold as tier one? Why are they all buying it? Why are they all repatriating it? And you can see they even has gone as far as to say it will be pegged to a new system backed by the BIS and the Project M Bridge, which the US dollar is not compatible with. So there's so many things that lead me to believe that somewhere in between what I am saying and what you are saying will happen. But indeed, to think that this system will go on much longer is about as foolhardy as believing that President Biden will make it to the end of this cycle and run for office here again.
Make it to the end of the week. Yeah. Okay. We're with Andy Schectman, the CEO, president, owner of Miles Franklin. Are you the biggest gold and silver dealer?
No, but I would say we're in the top 3 or 4 in the United States, and we've been doing it for almost 35 years. 10 billion in sales without a customer complaint, Mike. And I'll tell you, I couldn't be more thrilled to be on this show with you. And I just like the way that you see the world, the way you talk about it, and I like how you do your homework.
I appreciate that, and I couldn't be associated with somebody with more integrity than you. I think you're not only are you brilliant and know what you know so well, but you're a person of integrity, and I think that's you're the kind of person I want to be friends with in the future, because I don't have a lot.
That's what everything is about, relationships, Mike, and that's the one thing I've learned over all my years in business is that you friendship and relationships which have kind of gone by the wayside in this digital
Yeah.
world we live in,
Yeah.
is kind of the hallmark of my business. And so I thank you for the compliment. The feelings are mutual. Since the day I met you on Mark Z's show, you've intrigued me. And and now I see
You know,
why my suspicions were
it's funny.
correct. So I thank you.
Yeah. We used to be friends with our neighbors. Now we ignore our neighbors, but we're friends with people all over the world because we can connect with them all over the world. So we find it's easier to find people of like mind than it used to be. And I think that's
Well,
one of
and
the big
that's
advantages.
part of the problem with the divisiveness that has been created in this country, where you're defined by who you voted for in the last election, and cancel culture. That if you don't agree with me, well, the hell with you. That's. I grew up in a house in the '70s. My parents were hippies. My house smelled like weed. I was a jock. I went to the University of Minnesota with the intention of playing baseball before I hurt myself. But I will tell you that I grew up, even though I found my solace in playing sports. I grew up understanding that everyone had different ideologies, different lifestyles, and I was okay with it. Didn't matter where you came from, what you believed, who your parents were, where you were last night, or who you date, or what you do in your free time. You can still be my buddy, and we don't have to always agree, but we can just simply be friends and agree to disagree. It's not that way anymore, man. And now it's like when I go to
Well,
Thanksgiving with my wife, she says not a damn word. Do not say a word this
there,
time because I want to stay to dessert. And
yeah,
that's the
there,
sad part
there
of it
is
all.
there is a physics thing going on that I wrote about in a book that called The Choice about 14 years ago, where everyone is being forced to pick a side. So that's going to happen once we get through this birthing process for the new world we're going to create. I think we all come back together after that. But right
Well,
now,
God willing, brother, from your mouth to God's ears.
yeah, right now it's very polarizing, and I apparently that's the way it has to be to get through this. All right, I want to ask you some other questions about some other people and some other ideas and
Yeah.
concepts that are out there. I um I like I like Bix Weir as a person, but God bless him, he hasn't been right about anything in the last 5 years. I've been listening to him. I got to be honest. He talks about how silver is dramatically undervalued, and it has all these uses in the economy. And silver is going to go to the moon. It's going to be $500 an ounce, and he keeps making a prediction. It keeps not happening. It's obviously being suppressed. He's dead right about that, and he's a very smart guy and knows what he's talking about. But isn't it an issue the degree to which silver is used in our economy? I mean, if silver was, let's say, silver's true value was $500 an ounce, or let's say it was 1 to 1 with gold in terms of its usefulness in the economy and manufacturing and everything, $2,000 an ounce. What that does to the price of a cell phone, which needs silver to function, and these microphones and everything goes through the roof. Everything goes. I don't see how we can have a functioning economy without the suppression of silver prices. So I wanted to ask you a few things. I don't expect you to say anything bad about Bix, and I would never say anything bad about him. I've met him. I've been to some of his events. I just think he's got a blind spot towards how this is going to play out, and he's a little too negative for me. I'm more optimistic. But can our economy sustain a higher silver price than the $30 to $50 an ounce that we've lived with for the last, I don't know, a couple hundred years? Can it survive a higher price? Can we still have a functioning economy if silver goes through the roof? And what do you think it is that makes both gold and silver so valuable?
Well, and I share my screen with you?
Yeah, well, I don't think so. I don't know if you can.
Let's see. Allow to share.
You
Allow.
could
Yeah, I
send me
think
a
I
link.
can. Let me
You
see.
can
Hang
you
on.
can
Future
send me a
select.
link. You can
Do
send
you
me a
see
link.
it?
No, I don't see anything.
Yeah, because
Oh,
there
there
is
it
a
is.
share
There it is.
screen button here.
There it goes.
There.
Okay,
Do
there
you
we go.
see it?
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to show you something here. First of all, um, silver is what's called inelastic, meaning it's needed for that iPhone. And I don't know how much silver is in it, a tiny, tiny, tiny bit, but that little bit of silver, um, you need it. And how much would that increase the cost of everything? I'm not quite sure. If it was a massive amount inside of it, yes, but anything that conducts electricity uses a tiny bit of silver. But let me show you why silver is so cheap, why it hasn't reached fair value. All right, here's the first one. You see that? The red bar are the top four big commercial banks, and the green bar, that is the big eight banks. Okay, so you have eight banks right now on COMEX that have the largest concentrated short position in the history of the COMEX market of any commodity traded. Now ask yourself this: why the hell would eight banks be shorting, naked shorting silver the way that they are to the largest degree of any commodity ever traded? That's eight banks. That's against the law. That's the CFTC not doing their job, because that is a concentrated suppression right
Collusion,
there.
right? That's
All right.
collusion.
So
Yes.
that's number one. Right. So now I want to show you this. You can Google this, it'll pop right up. S.278. Notice the date, October 14th, 1942. It was a subcommittee hearing for banking and currency and the use, a bill to authorize the use of silver for war purposes. Now, up until the red line, let me just read that in case you can't see it. The present consumption of silver for war purposes is at the rate of about 100 million ounces a year and is growing rapidly. According to the War Production Board, it is only a matter of months before war demands will have increased sufficiently to require at least 200 million ounces a year. Now, this is 1942.
Wow.
Now, take a look at this. Now, first we see this wicked short position, concentrated short position. It's all naked. And remember I told you 2.9 billion ounces a day are trading in London. Now, the COMEX is an exchange platform when there's much more transparency. The LBMA, the London Metals Exchange, is an over-the-counter platform with far less transparency and regulation. So we don't know who's behind all of those short trades. We know they're all the bullion banks because every one of them is on the LBMA. But in 1942, they're heading towards 200 million ounces of silver per year. We see this concentrated short position more so than any commodity. Look at oil way down here, just a little bit right here. There's oil. Look at silver off the chart, right? And then platinum, gold, palladium. That's interesting. But now look at this. Here are the numbers from the supply demand that we see quoted from the Silver Institute. What the hell is missing? We got industrial, electric and electronics, of which photovoltaics, that's solar panels, 20%, brazing and alloy and solders, 3%, other industrial, 9%, photography, -3%, jewelry, 7%. Where the hell is military? Now, what I would simply say to you is this. Let me stop sharing this now. Hang on, I'll stop sharing.
I can take it.
I don't know how I do that.
I got it. I can take it.
Okay, thank you. So, where the hell is military in all this? Now, when you think how powerful the military industrial complex is, all of the wars that they find themselves either in or providing munitions to. I have a client who is a contractor for the Department of Defense. And I have said for 2 years now that there is 500 ounces of silver in the tip of a Tomahawk cruise missile. He came up to me at a conference in Vancouver and said, I'll be damned, you're right. I checked into it. There's between 13 and 14 kilograms of silver in a Tomahawk. Why is it not listed in the supply demand numbers? The military industrial complex is a step above the presidency. They pull the strings. These are the most powerful people in the world. Do you think there's any correlation between the fact that in 1942 we were on the verge of using 200 million ounces a year, and everything they make now is a whole hell of a lot more sophisticated and needs silver, and the fact that they've stripped it out of the supply demand numbers, and we still have a 250 million ounce shortfall? What is happening right now is this. I'm going to show one more screen, one more thing here, one more. Let me do this. Okay, look at that one. There's the Western vaults. You see this? This is silver. You see it falling? They know what we're doing, and countries like India are standing for delivery. And so they are beating us at our own game. That's all I really want to show you there. They're beating us at our own game, Mike, and they're standing for delivery. And so the reason that it has been so, BIX has been so wrong with this price projection is because the most powerful people in the world are stepping on the price of silver to fund the military industrial complex. But the thing is that all of these countries that are now standing for delivery never were sophisticated, wealthy, coordinated enough, or had the wherewithal or even the desire to do so, but they are now, because he or she who has the commodities makes the rules in this new system we're heading into. So they're using the suppression of the Western paper market against us. We did it for a long time to maintain military superiority, because if everyone knew how much silver went into these applications in aerospace, in submarines, in high-tech weapons that all use copious, if there's 500 ounces in the tip of a tomahawk, how much silver have we blown up? And so I guess all I'm simply trying to say to you is that yes, Bix has been wrong, but is he? If the markets were allowed to fully express themselves without being suppressed by the Western idiots that do this, which have now been discovered by the other countries, who now for the first time are coordinated enough, wealthy enough, cunning enough, and have the desire to play the game with us. Short the paper price in the West, stand for delivery on COMEX. And guess what? The CME group, the COMEX, developed a contract in 2015 that allows for what's called exchange for physical to be delivered to Brinks Hong Kong, which is a COMEX vault. So China is sucking slowly. That's why they are now valuing silver at $4 an ounce higher than the COMEX and the LBMA price. They are arbitraging every ounce that they can get their hands on slowly enough. It was $2 an ounce a year ago, 2.5, 7 months ago, $2 or $2, 2.5, 3, 3.25. And now it's 4. They keep turning up the heat. What happens if they make it $40 an ounce higher or $50 an ounce higher? They will siphon it all. All I'm simply trying to say to you is that no one knows what the real price of silver is, because the Western banks are allowed to trade 3.5 times global mine supply annual in one day, every day, in London, and rehypothecate the silver in contract form by 1,700% on COMEX. These distortions have created a situation where price discovery is dead on the COMEX until there is a failure to deliver. And that's
So,
coming, because now for the first time ever, these countries are standing for delivery. They never, ever, ever, ever,
just
ever
like just
did
like
that before.
with the dollars back, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so are you saying then that the defense agencies are hoarding silver in
Yes.
the background,
Yes.
and there is far more of it than we know? And I assume they recover it. Like if they blow up a tomahawk, they must go in and try to recover as much
How
of
do
it.
you do? It's vaporized. I don't think you can do that. And what are you going to go behind enemy lines and do it? So I think silver is found in nature, Mike, and like your skin is epidermis. It's found in nature in a form called epithermal, very near the surface. It's coming out of the ground right now at a ratio of 7 to 1. But for 5,000 years, the geologic ratio was 16 to 1. The big deposits were found decades ago. Of all of the silver that was mined last year, about 850 million ounces, about 150 million was through recycling, but 850 million ounces of that, only roughly 25 to 30% came from companies that mine silver. They can't find it anymore. The other 60 plus percent, 65% came from byproduct mining of other metals where they stumble across it. So it's disappearing in nature. And I think they realize, look, in Canada this year, there are about, I don't know how many banks and mining companies that are petitioning the Canadian government to reclassify silver from industrial to strategic. Why do you think India has bought 700 million ounces from the West in the last 3 years and just bought $1.5 billion worth from, and had it imported through the, what's it called? I can't even, who just joined BRICS alongside of Saudi Arabia? I'm having a brain fart.
India, Greenland. I was gonna.
No, in Dubai. What is the capital of Dubai? Dubai is the
Oh,
capital of United Arab Emirates. They had it
Eric.
imported through the Emirates because they have a treaty with them for low import duties, $1.5 billion worth. And so they're accumulating silver because they know it is disappearing in nature, and it is a strategic metal for green, for digital, for military, for all of the things plus monetary. So
Do you think? Let me interrupt you. Do you think this is why Donald Trump? Let's assume he survives. He doesn't get assassinated. And by the way, I've talked about this is the fifth assassination attempt that I know of on Donald Trump, and I know that there have been others. I've been told that there have been others, but I know of five now. But let's assume he survives. Do you think this is why he wants to buy Greenland? because Greenland has not only shit tons of rare earths and other things we use in cell phone production and so forth. Oh, and by the way, news update: the water tower at the site in Butler, Pennsylvania, where I was given reports from my Secret Service contact that there was a second shooter, is now surrounded and blocked off, and police are investigating. So I just thought
Are
I'd
you
give you that
kidding me?
update. Yeah, I'm not kidding.
Well, and that probably is because get this, and this
But is
is
that
something
why
that I
Trump
just
wants to
learned
buy
the other
Greenland?
day.
Yeah, I was just asking, do you think that's why Trump wants to buy Greenland?
Yeah, well,
Is
I
this
mean, this is something it
unexplored?
wouldn't surprise me because listen to this. Lindsey Graham,
Yeah.
he just came out the other day and said that the Ukraine is the natural resource motherlode, that they're sitting on $12 trillion of critical minerals in the Ukraine, said Senator Lindsey Graham. Ukraine is a raw material motherlode that is home to 117 of the 120 most widely used minerals and metals and a major source of fossil fuels. You can see what I'm reading here. Ukraine harbors some of the world's largest reserves of titanium and iron ore fields, of untapped lithium and massive deposits of coal. The Post added the Ukraine has myriad other reserves, including stores of natural gas, oil, rare earth minerals, essential for certain high-tech components that could hamper Western Europe's search for alternatives to imports from Russia and China. According to the Post, at least 12.4 trillion of natural resources are located in the eastern part of Ukraine, where most of the fighting has happened during the war. See, I take notes all the time. Every day I read for 2-3 hours and take these kinds of notes, but I didn't know that until I just read that recently. So yeah, it would make a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you, as to why they are going after a place like the Ukraine and why not. Maybe at least Donald Trump has the sense to do it the right way rather than go in there and create a war and kill millions of people and destabilize the world.
So, okay. And the other place that makes sense is Antarctica, which is basically unexplored. Well, it's probably a lot more explored than we think. I mean, the Germans were certainly exploring it. I mean, so do we know for a fact that these supplies are limited? And, again, yeah, Ukraine is an example. Zimbabwe is mineral rich. Is it that we're really running out of sources, or is it that we just haven't exploited all the sources that we
Well, I
have?
think both. I mean, how much of the ocean has never been explored? How much of Antarctica has never been explored just because of, the difficulty in doing so? I've watched the Y Files episodes on Antarctica. I mean, how much has really been explored? What do we know that's down there? But this is why you see the BRICS and the Belt Road Initiative, you know, that are going into all of these underdeveloped countries like Zimbabwe, all of the African and South American countries, and striking deals cooperatively to help them exploit their natural resources by building oil refineries and oil rigs, gold and silver mines for the rare earths and whatnot, building the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the maritime channels, the train tracks, all of that to bring it to market, to industrialize the countries, have a piece of it, and do so cooperatively. So it's a little bit of both, I would say. But the U.S. does it with a gun to people's head instead of doing it cooperatively. So we are running out of places where we can exploit without creating wars, and maybe that's why the war in the Ukraine started to begin with.
Okay. Well, yeah, there's always another alternative. Hang on a second. Just dealing a lot of trolls today. Um, that there's always a financial reason behind everything. It's these wars are all financial. The invasion of Iraq was to get the oil, and I think the revaluation of the currency. Um, and what do you think? Why should people have gold and silver? Do you really think it's? I mean, I know you're committed to this. I know you've been doing this forever. Is it going to be not just the backbone of the new financial system, but I mean, what's the value of having them over time?
Well, what has it been for 5,000 years? It's been wealth that has outlived two world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, and every pandemic. And here we are 5,000 years after it was written about hundreds of times in the Bible. And the biggest, most well funded, well informed, sophisticated traders on the globe are buying it at a level the world's never seen. It's money. Everything else is just credit. That's what JP Morgan said. Gold and silver are money. Everything else is just credit. So, It's wealth. And I would rather bet on 5,000-year-old wealth that the biggest money, most sophisticated money on the planet is accumulating rather than take my chances on dollar bills that long after they're hanging from a frame in the Smithsonian of what used to be gold and silver will still be wealth. It's
Okay.
wealth, Mike. I don't sell gold for people to get wealthy. I sell it because it is wealth.
It is wealth. Yeah, that's a great line, and I think that that really, really is compelling. All right, Andy, let's talk about your company, Miles Franklin. You guys have been in business for a long, long time,
35 years this coming February.
and you go to the website milesfranklin.com. Why don't you just talk to the folks about the advantages of working with you, um, and
Well, look, when you're dealing with, first of all, for people who want really good prices or questions answered, anything they've seen on this show or any of the other ones I've done with you on Mark's show or any others, the best place to go would be to email us at info@milesfranklin.com, and say Mike Bara sent me. Any questions that you have, let us know, or just request our price list. The price list that we will send you is far superior to the prices you'll see on our website. We do that for a reason. Prices on the price list we will send you will be as competitive or more so than anyone in North America. We've been doing this for 35 years. And when you're buying a commodity, or 34 and a half, when you're buying a commodity that is homogenous, meaning it's the same wherever you buy it, you're buying the company or the person. We've never had a customer complaint in 34 years, in 10 billion in sales. And even though I moved to Delray Beach, Florida 3.5 years ago, when during the George Floyd riots and the
mhm.
defunding of the police, um, we have had a satellite office in Delray Beach for 20 years nearly. I left my corporate office in Minnesota because it's the only state in the United States that regulates what is a federally non regulated industry. Most of the companies out there won't touch Minnesota, they won't deliver to it because they too would have to be licensed, bonded, and background checked every year, like we are. And it is onerous for the owner of the company, but it holds us to a far higher standard. And so not only have we not had complaints in all of these years, we're licensed and bonded and background checked. And so that's why they would want to deal with us. But while the website and our new website will be out by September 1st, which will be vastly different than this, much more user friendly, and it's basically almost done now. We're just putting the finishing touches on it. But we're kind of a brokerage model. We only allow up to $10,000 to be purchased on the site. Give us a call. Send us an email if you just want the price list. You'll find it will be much better than those prices and better than almost everyone online. And that's why we keep it close to the vest, um, or any questions that people have. And we'll make damn sure that your followers are not the first customer complaint we've ever had in going on 35 years.
That's phenomenal, phenomenal record. Okay. Last question before we get going. Info@milesfranklin.com. I put it in the chat.
And
And
Mike Barra sent me. That's important so we know where they came from.
yeah, yeah, be sure to mention that if you get a chance. Um, if you had a suggestion for someone, let's say somebody had a couple of grand lying around that they could put into anything, and I know you're going to say gold or silver, but let's talk about something specific. If you had 2 grand and you're going to put it, you decided precious metals is the way to go for this money, what would you suggest they do? Where would you suggest they put that? What would be the best investment for them? Um,
Well, I mean,
Gold coins
because
or bars or silver.
yeah, I mean, um, maybe the best values in the pre 1965 silver. They call it junk silver, constitutional silver, dimes and quarters minted prior to 1965.
Right.
90% silver by weight, the most universally flexible form of silver. Right there are the half dollars at two threat. What does that
Mhm.
say? Yeah, there you go, right there. But
Yeah.
I mean, bars and generic rounds are going to be the least expensive. That is not that stuff there. If you want coins made by a sovereign government, the maple leaf from Canada, the Australian kangaroo, the Austrian Philharmonic, the UK Britannia, they'll all be cheaper than the United States Eagle right now. Um, Look, the only place that I put my money, and I'm not the poster child, Mike, for Finance 101,
Right.
aside from owning a large precious metals company, The majority of my wealth is in physical gold and silver. The only other place I feel comfortable keeping it would be in ultra short-term treasuries of 6 months or of duration or less. And I almost feel uncomfortable with that. But they're
Yeah,
paying 5%. You can buy 90-day treasuries paying 5% with immediate daily liquidity.
I'm
You
not
can
sure
sell them in
the current treasury is going to be around in 90 days. The way
well, it
things,
may not be, but where else do you put it? If that's really the case, if that's the way you feel, then
yeah,
having your money in stocks and bonds is as stupid as a mud wall. The only place, or dollars, or in the bank. The one thing that gold and silver offer you that just about no other asset does is they are assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. There is no counterparty risk.
right,
So, if I'm holding this gold coin in my hand right here, there's no counterparty liability. I don't have to rely on a counterparty to access it. And if
right.
you've ever read the book The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb, or go to YouTube and watch the hour-long video, I swear to you, if you don't sell your shit immediately, I'll buy you a beer next time I'm in Vegas, because it's one of the scariest things you will ever see. The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. Watch it on YouTube. It's an hour. It will blow your freaking mind how everything is held by a central authority called the DTCC. Basically, they hold, you don't
Depository
own your
Trust Clearing,
stocks. Right.
Depository Trust Clearinghouse Corporation. Actually, I screwed up. It's not the BIS. It's the DTCC. Where they
Yes.
have your birth
And
certificate.
read that. I mean, that'll blow your damn mind. So this stuff doesn't belong to you.
Yeah,
So you want to talk about the reasons to own it? You have a greater chance of being ripped off by the system like that
yeah.
than you do by any would-be burglar coming into your home suspecting you have gold. And so, it's one of these deals where I think it's wealth free from counterparty liability, and that's why I would hold it.
Guys, sorry about the volume issues. I know Andy was a little low and I was a little loud, but great information, great show. I'll get that fixed next time. I'd like to thank my guest, Andy Schectman of Miles
I
Franklin.
hope we do this again, bro. Yeah, for
We
sure.
will do this maybe once a month, and maybe not
Love
this
it.
exact show, but info at milesfranklin.com if you want to inquire. And the website is milesfranklin.com. And don't forget to mention that you heard about it on my podcast. That's a nice that'd be nice of you to do that. We would really appreciate it. All right. Andy, I think you got to stay ready. You got to stay ready because to be on the air, because I do think we are going to have tumultuous shifts, and I don't think a month from now or 3 months from now when the election happens, I think we could be having them this week. Be ready to do a quick whiskey and wisdom or something, or
I
be
am
on any.
always ready for that. And your friend, our mutual friend, Mark, he is one of the best human beings I've ever dealt
Yep.
with. And I love the guy like a brother. And I will come back whenever he or you ask me. It would be my honor. And look, I do 15 of these or so a week every week. So I'm always ready. And it's kind of like I just feel like it's my thing. It's what I
Yeah.
enjoy doing. I feel like I'm supposed to be doing it for some strange reason that I can't even articulate, because it,
It goes back to the baseball thing. You wanted to be a baseball player. You might have been good enough, but you were meant to be doing what you're doing. You were meant to be helping people this way. I remember meeting a guy, big black dude at a conference once, UFO conference. He was a lawyer, and he said, "Oh, I played college ball for Alabama. I ran a 4.340." Well, you run a 4.340 and you can catch a ball, you got a chance of playing in the NFL. But he tore his knee up his senior season because he wasn't supposed to do that. He's supposed to be, he's supposed to be doing something else with his life. So I think these things happen sometimes for a reason. That we have Rod Stewart. Rod Stewart was one of the best soccer players in England when he was 16, but he had to make a choice. Am I going to be a singer or am I going to be a football player? And he thought to himself, well, a singer can have a longer career, so that's what he chose. But he's a world-class soccer player. And these things happen for a reason. And I think you're doing what you're supposed to be doing and sharing with the world the knowledge you're supposed to be sharing. And I think,
appreciate that. I'd like to think that to be the case, but it's an honor, Mike, to be here, and I look forward to picking up with you where we left off.
I got a feeling we're going to have a lot of news to talk about in the next few days, if not few weeks, or
Well,
a few weeks, if
count
not.
me colored. I'm in.
All right. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for being on the show. Appreciate each and every one of you. I don't have anything else planned for the rest of the week, but you never know. I didn't plan to go on and talk about the president almost being assassinated last Saturday, but I had to. So let's see what happens as things evolve. Stay vigilant. And I do have one piece of advice from Jen: stay away from rooftop bars for a while. Let's not do
Yeah.
that. Stay away from rooftops. Love you guys. Thank you for being here. Thanks,